Eagles Entertainment.
With the 10th pick in the 2021 NFL Draft, the Philadelphia Eagles select.
You're listening to the Journey to the Draft podcast.
Welcome to the Journey to the Draft podcast, presented by Life Brand. I'm your host, Fran Duffy, and today we continue our preview of the 2021 college football season going into the Big 12, and we got a lot of fun teams to break down. We've got the Oklahoma Sooners, Lincoln Riley, potential number one pick whenever he decides to come out, and Spencer Rattler, the quarterback there. We've got a lot of great offenses, some interesting defensive players as well throughout the rest of the conference. We got Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, Iowa State, very interesting team there on both sides of the football. New look Texas squad. We've got TCU and Baylor, Texas Tech, West Virginia, Kansas State, and Kansas. We're going to cover all 10 of these teams in depth with a couple of guys. Obviously, everybody knows Ben Fennell. He's always on this show. You can follow him on Twitter at @BenFennell_NFL. And then we're also going to be joined by a guy that I've been following now for a couple of years, and that's Ryan Roberts. You can follow him on Twitter at RiseNDraft. He works over with the College Gridiron Showcase. He does a great job on Twitter posting scouting reports and breakdowns of college players all across the country. So I thought, you know what, let's bring Ryan onto the show. He could break down some of these top players in the Big 12. Those of you wondering, where is Dane Brugler? I need my dose of Dane. Well, he announced last week. I didn't want to say it on the show. I didn't want to break news here on the show. He and his wife welcomed a couple of extra kids to the family as they welcomed a beautiful pair of twins just a week ago. So Dane's going to enjoy some well-deserved time off. I would say rest. He's not resting right now. That's to be sure. But we'll have Dane on once again soon. In his place, we've got Ryan Roberts. We've got a lot to break down. As always, the best way to throw us your support as we get closer and closer to the college football season, go on to Apple Podcasts, leave us a rating, leave us a comment. Appreciate everybody that has done that lately. If you've got a question, make sure you drop it on there as well. And we don't just have the Big 12 preview today, because we also are going to be welcoming one of my favorite interviews every single year, and that's with Pete Sampson from The Athletic covering Notre Dame. We're going to get into a lot of the top players for the Irish this year. We talked about some of them last year when we broke down the top prospects outside the Power Five with Ben and with Emory Hunt. Well, Pete's going to join us once again to talk through some of those top players. So we've got Pete Sampson, we've got Ryan Roberts, we've got Ben Fennell. Let's kick things off now with Draft Buzz.
Now it's time for Draft Buzz.
All right, well, excited to dig into the top prospects in the Big 12 Conference. As I mentioned, joined by Ben Fennell and Ryan Robertson. Guys, look, there's one big name that's kind of looming over this whole thing, and that's the redshirt sophomore quarterback, Spencer Rattler from Oklahoma. I know all three of us have thoughts on Spencer Rattler. Ben, I'll go to you first. I know this is a guy that you definitely wanted to talk about, and for good reason, one of the more talented players, regardless of position in the entire draft.
Well, Spencer Rattler out of Oklahoma, before even getting into his ability or how he plays the quarterback position, I think it's important to kind of dissect who he is, because he is a fiery, confident competitor. He is a leader in the locker room. He's a leader in the huddle. He's a guy that gives not only the confidence within himself, but the offense and the team. He's a guy that people want to rally around. He is a CEO type quarterback. Now, how does he get the job done? A little unconventional. He's incredible arm strength, can throw from multiple angles, on the move, incredible improvisational skills, and he's a little bit of a creator when the play breaks down. He keeps his eyes up, a lot like the way we evaluated Zach Wilson, who we wouldn't say is an elite athlete or a game breaker, in the open field or, when creating out of structure, but he's a creator for other people when things break down. I think that's what you want first and foremost, not only Saturdays, but on Sundays, and use that athleticism just when you need to. Now, things he needs to improve on: the ball security, the presence in the pocket, the timing, the anticipation, the reads, which is a great offense that Lincoln Riley has designed for the quarterback. Just needs to clean up some things in the polishing of playing quarterback. They're going to put up yards. They're going to put up points. Now let's just clean up all the mechanical issues and the timing issues on a down-to-down basis.
Honestly, like 3 or 4 years ago, after watching Spencer Rattler, I probably would be very down on him. But we have talked before about things that we've learned from our past, right? And I had some of the same issues that I had with Spencer Rattler. I had those same issues with Patrick Mahomes, who was that cavalier passer, outstanding arm talent, consistent ball placement, go put it wherever he wanted to, but was definitely a little bit unconventional in terms of what he did going through his progressions and living outside of structure. And I think that Spencer Rattler, kind of to your point, Ben, a little bit too much outside of structure. You want to see him hit more of those layups that Lincoln Riley is able to create in that offense. But that said, he can make any throw. So it's a matter of, hey, if we can rein him in a little bit and get him to cut down on some of those mistakes that he made, especially the first half of last year. And again, that was his first year starting, just a redshirt freshman a year ago. I think then you could say that the arrow is pointing up. Ryan, excited to get your thoughts on Spencer Rattler as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what Ben was kind of talking about with, being the CEO, being the fiery competitor, I think that really came into effect because you just mentioned it. The fact of like the first game was against an FCS opponent. He killed it. Then he kind of went through a little bit of stretch where he kind of had to really understand what he can get away with, what he can't get away with. But then when he hits that adversity, he comes out on the other side and he plays his best stretch football going down, to the end of the season, the latter portions down into the bowl game where he was fantastic. So I think that the ability for him to come out on the other side after hitting adversity says a lot to the character that he has, to the competitor that he has. And then, the unteachables are what gets you so excited because this kid, just such a natural passer of the football, being able to layer to multiple levels of the field, throw with touch and being able to zip the football into tight windows when he needs to. I think that there is everything from a passing perspective, and then he can do the things outside of structure. Is he the most dynamic athlete of all time? I don't think so, but I think that he can extend the pocket. He can work out of structure. I think there are even some times where his athleticism could even be more of a help to him because I feel like he extends the ball as a passer so often that sometimes he gets himself into trouble by holding onto the ball a little too much. There are maybe a couple easy first downs running the football that could help him from making some of those poor judgment throws. But I really do think that he has all the tools. He's the, almost consensus guy to potentially be the first quarterback off the board next year. And I think that those unteachables is what people really gravitate towards.
I think it's a little bit of that arm arrogance. And once he gets out of structure, he gets really arrogant where it's like run for that free 6-7 yards in front of you rather than trying to whiz it in there over the middle back across the grain, which he has the ability to. But let's just clean up that type of decision making. Completely on board with what you're saying, Ryan.
Yeah, I think when you look overall at just the overall body of work, and Ryan, you alluded to his ability to fight through adversity. We saw that over the course of the season, but even like if you just take one game as a microcosm, you go to that Texas game, he gets benched, for all intents and purposes, he goes to the sideline for the majority of the second quarter. They bring him back after halftime and he leads them to victory against the Longhorns. It was like a 5 overtime win. I've watched that game numerous times over the last week because of players on both sides. But I think that's a really good example of his ability to fight through adversity. My last note on Spencer Rattler comes from his former teammate in Neville Gallimore. I talked with him down at the Senior Bowl, January 2020. This was Jalen Hurts' final season, down there at Oklahoma. Spencer Rattler was a redshirt player, so he didn't play in that 2019 season. But I knew he was the big, he was the hotshot name coming up, likely going to be a starter next year. So I asked Neville Gallimore about him, and Neville has said, look, this guy brought it every single day in practice. Like he did not take a day off. Everything was like a game for him. So you could tell that he always kind of brought those competitive juices to the practice field, which you like to see from a former teammate as well, Ben.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something we saw out in high school with Spencer Rattler. And I feel like some of the more endearing things we see in the NFL, some of those sideline wires. And I just think back to Patrick Mahomes being down 21 in the playoffs to the Texans or whatever it was 2 years ago. And they never blinked. They never flinched. And he's that type of guy that I think gives everybody confidence, whether you're down early or down late. It's like, we got Spencer. Spencer can get us out of this. And he just kind of oozes that type of confidence from himself to his teammates. And I think that's what you want first and foremost, somebody infectious, particularly at that quarterback spot.
So obviously, look, this category is the top prospect. And we all assume that if Spencer Rattler is in this draft, that he would be the first Big 12 player off the board. But I do think there's another guy that you could make an argument for, and that would be Iowa State running back Breece Hall, 6'1", 220 pounds. He's a big back with great vision and patience. That's really one of the things that stands out to me is his full field vision. He sets defenders up at the second and third level for failure consistently. And that's not just, he gets up to the second level and is able to make that man miss. He's making those guys miss when he's approaching the line of scrimmage because he'll just throw, I'm going C gap. He gets the safety or our linebacker to bite down inside. And now he's off outside the opposite gap. So I think when you look at Breece Hall, this is a guy who could be a foundation piece at that size. Excellent contact balance, ability to play through contact, proven 3-down player as well, good blocker, not a dynamic athlete and not a high volume pass target, but a guy that has shown soft hands when used as a receiver. So I think when you look at the overall 3-down potential, this is a guy that I think can be a lead ball carrier for an NFL offense. And at that size, the ability to be the piece on offense as well. So Breece Hall, a really, really exciting player, just going to be a junior here this fall.
Hey, really quick, 30 seconds. I think Vegas would be solely set on Spencer Rattler being the first Big 12 player off the board. But who else is in that conversation? Fran, you're throwing Breece Hall. I may throw some money on Marion Winfrey from Oklahoma, who came out of JUCO, only 1 year out there so far. So his second year out in Norman coming up. If he keeps ascending, he could have a top 10 type of, trajectory and value in next year's draft. Just trying to throw some other names in the conversation. I think it's going to be Rattler, Breece Hall, Perry and Winfrey. I don't know if you had somebody, Ryan, maybe to throw into the number 2 spot for a Vegas prop bet.
Well, I'd say Breece would definitely be my guy. I love the pick from Fran. I mean, he's a guy that I've seen a lot of different comparisons thrown out there. I've seen Lev Bell, and the guy that I kind of threw out there he reminded me of, kind of working back to the Jets days of Curtis Martin. I feel like I don't think that he is per se the prototype power back. I don't think he's per se the prototype home run threat, but I think that he does everything very well to plus. And then that vision that you talked about, being, just in a zone system, being able to hit backside A to B, maybe even all the way bends it all the way back to C. I think that he is definitely a guy that is firmly in that conversation. I love the Perry and Winfrey mention. I think, Ben, we talked about this a couple times on Twitter, just the Oklahoma defense in general. I'm an Isaiah Thomas fan, defensive end that has worked both inside and out. I think he's that, that big end that really has some alignment versatility on obvious passing down. So exciting times for Oklahoma football in general and defense, because I can't remember the last time that this defense was this talented.
They're about 8, 9, 10 deep in that front 7. I don't know if there's enough snaps to go around. I mean, there's guys that have been there for 6, 7 years, like Caleb Kelly, that have been leapfrogged by young guys, and just doesn't seem like there's enough spots, but they are deep.
It was a daunting task, like getting into study that front 4 specifically. It's like there's just too many guys to be able to get into. But we'll talk about a couple of these guys here through the rest of this podcast. Let's keep the conversation going, staying on the offensive side. And we'll go first with our top senior on offense. We'll stay with the Oklahoma Sooners. Ryan, we'll come to you. I know you want to talk about a guy on their offensive front.
Yeah, I think that they have 2 very talented guard prospects in Marquise Hayes and Tyrese Robinson. I prefer Marquise a little bit just because I love the body and the frame that he possesses, right around 6'5", 340 pounds. And I think that he does everything that you would assume of a guard of that size. That you would think, gap power schemes, the ability to displace gaps, work up to the second level. He does all those things really well, but I also think that he's a pretty solid athlete for the position as well. And I think he has some flexibility to him. I've seen his body get contorted in some awkward ways, and he's just able to maintain balance. And I don't see him end up on the ground unless he's on top of another player. So I think that he has a lot of the size attributes. I think he's a good athlete overall. I think that he can fit into whether you're a heavy zone scheme, heavy power scheme. I think he can do a little bit of everything. So Marquise Hayes, for me, starting guard, forming arguably the best guard duo in the country there for Oklahoma, is a fantastic football player.
Yeah, I know we'll continue to talk about that Oklahoma offensive front. I'm going to stay on that side of the ball, and I'm going to go with Oklahoma running back Kennedy Brooks, who opted out a year ago, so did not play in 2020, 5'11", 214 pounds. And to me, I look at Kennedy Brooks as just a very solid, do-everything player. He's a patient runner. He's slippery. He's a pretty good blocker. He's quicker than fast, solid power to play through contact. It's kind of like Breece Hall, just kind of a lowercase Breece Hall. And I think when you look at Kennedy Brooks, I lean more towards this guy's a strong number 2, maybe a lead committee back than a true foundation piece of an offense. Maybe you think of like prime Jeremy Hill after he came out of LSU, like that kind of player. But I like Kennedy Brooks, and that's a guy that I feel could be in the running for one of the top seniors in this conference, especially if he can come back and have a really strong season after not playing a year ago. Ben, let's come to you, and I know you want to go back to Iowa State and to the Cyclones.
Yeah, Kennedy reminds me a lot of Chris Carson, just to give kind of a snapshot to some fans out there. But those Cyclones, man, they got a bunch of prospects on both sides of the ball this year. I think that starts with tight end Charlie Kohler, who's 6'6", 255, returned for another season out there. One of the more productive tight ends in the country with over 100 reception in his career. But the more impressive thing, only 3 drops on 160 catches. This guy is a quarterback's best friend, extremely reliable. He's that low post rebounder type, good in the red zone, good over the middle, contested catches. He's not really a separator. He's not a yak threat, kind of a lumbering runner guy. He's a good, not a great blocker. I just think he's really well-rounded, experienced all over the formation, whether it's, in the wing, the Y, the slot, you want to put him in the backfield. Reminds me a ton of like a Todd Heap. who is never a over-the-top blocker, never an over-the-top receiving threat, but a B+ in both. And I think he's going to be a guy that plays for a long time, maybe an early day 2 pick, not talking a first rounder, but Charlie Kohler has put together a lot of good football on tape for Iowa State.
And you may have listened to Ben just now and thought, oh, well, that guy doesn't sound like he would be an NFL starter. So often at that position at tight end, if you are, as Ben described, if you are a B player as a pass catcher and as a blocker, more often than not, those guys will, quote unquote, start ahead of a guy who is A in one category and C or D in another. So if you are well-rounded like that, you've got that versatility, you can be a 3-down player as a starter at tight end. Let's go now to the underclassmen ranks here. Most intriguing underclassmen on offense. Ben, I want to come back to you because I know you're excited about a couple of these receivers in this conference.
There's a bunch of interesting ones, as there always is, at Texas and Oklahoma. We go down to Texas Tech, and this is going to be quick, guys. Eric Ezukanma, really interesting player, 6'3", 220, led the team back-to-back in receiving down there at Texas Tech, only a redshirt junior. Unfortunately, a pretty serious broken arm in spring practice. I'm not sure when he's going to be available, when he's going to be healthy, but he was certainly a guy NFL scouts had their eyeballs on this fall. Really good size, 6'3", 220 again, but unfortunately hurt in spring practice, but we won't forget about you.
I'm going to stay in the state here with Texas wide receiver Joshua Moore, who's going into his junior season, 6'1", 162 pounds. So a very slender build, really kind of that tall, linear, like, you think like a Robbie Anderson, a Marquez Valdez-Scantling, that kind of a build. Led the team in receiving last year in catches, yards, touchdowns. He caught 9 touchdowns a year ago from Sam Ehlinger. Just needed to play better through contact. Again, 162 pounds, that shows up on film, whether he's getting bumped off the route, winning at the catch point. I want to see him play a little bit better through contact, but the flashes are really, really good. And you guys both know this time of year, we're a little bit more likely to buy into the upside, to buy into the flashes. And when you watch Josh Moore, this guy's got speed to get on top, but then also to make plays at all 3 levels of the football field. I just want to see more consistency here from Josh Moore. Kind of reminds me of Jamon Moore, who was I believe a 4th-round pick, Ben, right, of the Green Bay Packers a few years ago out of Mizzou. Similar kind of build, similar kind of athlete, similar skill set. Moore didn't necessarily make it with the Packers. I want to see if Josh Moore can build off what he showed as a sophomore a year ago. Ryan, I want to come to you. Any thoughts on either of these 2 receivers here in Josh Moore or Ezukanma? Or let's hear from your name as well. I know you want to go back to the Oklahoma trenches.
Yeah. I think Eric Ezukanma is and I apologize if I, butchered that name.
No, you nailed it. I wish I said it that clean.
Awesome. So I think that he's the height, weight, speed guy. And I mean, when you look at the yards per catch that he's been able to put over the last couple of years, like this guy is not limited to just being that traditional, possession receiver that doesn't have the ability to push vertically. Like he definitely has that attributes. He can win above the rim. I like a lot of what he is. Unfortunately, with the injury, like Ben was kind of talking about, it's very unfortunate. Maybe we won't get the full scope of what he's able to do, but I really am excited about him just for the future. And I know you guys, I listened to an episode the other day where you were talking about, the transfer portal and guys, some of the top prospects that were transferred this offseason. Wanye Morris, for me, was a guy that I want to highlight, that another Oklahoma guy who talked about Tyrese Robinson a little bit, talked about Marquise Hayes more in depth. This guy is the assumed starter at left tackle for Oklahoma. And I highlighted him a little bit the other day because I watched the Tennessee film, and there's a lot to like from number 64. Again, we go back to the unteachables at offensive tackle that are so important, the length, the size, measurables. I think he's a good athlete. It's not nearly a finished product, and I think he has a relatively high ceiling to him, but the floor scares me a little bit. But I really am excited to see him work at Oklahoma, who's done such a good job in recent years developing guys like Orlando Brown Jr. and Cody Ford and so many good football players on the next level. I'm excited to see how good Wanye Morris can be with some great coaching.
Hey, really quick, guys, before we turn the page here, that's a great call there on Wanye Morris coming over from Tennessee, which seems like there's volunteers now dispersed all over the country. They may not have won a lot of games out there, but there's some very talented players. But going back to Josh Moore really quick.
Yeah.
This guy's 165 pounds soaking wet.
Yep.
Is there becoming a little bit more of an acceptance of these receivers, that they aren't just the outliers, the Deshaun Jacksons and Taylor Gabriels that come around once every 7 years, but now we're seeing almost year in and year out, and not just over the top guys, but guys that win underneath, whether it's Jalen Darden and Tutu, who got drafted last year, or KJ Hamler the year before that. It's seeming like these sub 175 guys are becoming a little bit more accepted at the next level.
I think if you show, and this is the case with all guys at every position, if you are undersized, then you need to be able to show some kind of exceptional trait elsewhere to be able to overcome that, right? So you mentioned Tutu, like, yeah, what was he, 155 at that medical recheck a couple months ago, right? But I mean, the guy runs like the wind. He is a ridiculously dynamic athlete. So he's going to bring that. Jalen Darden, a really dynamic player down there for North Texas. So to me, when I see Josh Moore, I'm like, all right, like, if he comes in at 166, we'll see what he comes in, by the time we get to February and March. But I think when you look at Moore, he's got to be able to prove that he could be a consistent big play weapon to be able to kind of overcome that lack of size. Just in my opinion.
Yeah, I think it's just an interesting kind of fluid developing, group of prospects. And when you have, 166-pound Hollywood Brown going in the first round, it's like nobody's really ruled out anymore.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you guys have obviously gotten into a lot with the Devonta Smith narrative, right? But about being 160 whatever pounds. And I think that we have seen that some people, it makes them nervous, right? Because you don't have historical data for that size profile to be overly successful. But I feel like that narrative could be changed soon as we get more and more guys of that size profile. Soon those outliers are going to become not a trend, but maybe just a more of the accepted type of thresholds for the wide receiver position.
My brain, for some reason, didn't even go to Devontae. I don't know why he wasn't even on the tip of my tongue.
Well, guys, honestly, we talked at the top of the show about Spencer Rattler, who's 6'1", 205. And if this was 7 years ago, we would be like, oh, he's too small. Like, oh, it's too small. But we're past that at this point, right? I mean, we saw Kyler Murray go 1 overall. Obviously, we've seen the success of Russell Wilson. Baker Mayfield goes 1 overall at his size. So, we're seeing that across the board, us kind of moving past the size narrative on the offensive side of the football. All right, we're going to take a quick break so I can tell you more about Eagles Youth Football Clinics. And if you're local to the Philadelphia area, you have to know that they are back and in person on July 24th, open to boys and girls ages 6 to 14. This non-contact football clinic is a great opportunity for young athletes to learn from Eagles legends and improve their football skills with the Eagles of Football Academy coaches. Athletes will be grouped by age and taught football skills and fundamentals. Participants receive an Eagles Academy t-shirt and an Eagles player pack. Register today at eaglesacademies.com. Let's now switch gears, though, to defense. And I'll go with a player, Ben, that you mentioned at the top in terms of a guy that could be in the running to be one of the top players in this conference. And that's Oklahoma's Perrion Winfrey, 6'4", 290 pounds. Ben, you mentioned coming out of junior college. He was the top junior college recruit coming out last year. Goes to Oklahoma, starts 8 games. Goes second team all Big 12, was pretty productive over the course of the entire season. Good athlete, gets off the ball fast, good change of direction. He'll corner and flatten and chase the football, burst to close. He's rangy. He's got a good motor. He's fun to watch. And really, honestly, with that scheme, we talked about how deep that front is. They are so active. It is like stunt after stunt after stunt after stunt. So those guys are always on the move. You don't necessarily see them try and two gap and hold their ground and try and anchor all the time in the run game. You don't see a ton of the run game in the Big 12 anyway. So that'll be a little bit of a question. But I think when you look at Winfrey, this guy has the ability to be a really impressive interior disruptor. If he can take that next step of really impressive, I think he's an NFL starter. So Winfrey, that would be my pick here in terms of top senior on the defensive side. Ryan, let's go to you. Who would be your pick for that selection?
Yeah, one of my favorite watches I've had over the last few weeks. Obviously, I knew the name with Terrell Bernard, the linebacker out of Baylor, because he was off to a fantastic start in 2020. Had over 50 tackles in the 5 games that he played before he suffered a shoulder injury that cost him to the latter of the season. So for a guy of this size profile, I have tended to shy away from it a little bit, because you usually pencil these guys in as kind of, your traditional run and chase weak side linebackers. They have to contribute on special teams. For me, when I watched Bernard, I saw so much more than that. And I kind of gave a loose comparison because it's not direct comparison 1-for-1 for a size kind of attributes, but he plays a ton, in my opinion, like a Fred Warner out of San Francisco. And honestly, I'm not predicting that this guy is going to be the best linebacker in the NFL in a couple years. But what I see on the second level is a very good athlete. I see great eye discipline. He's not a guy that's going to be traditional stack and shed and, use a ton of physicality and length to defeat blocks, but he's a great block slipper. He gets to the spot quickly, good zone awareness. And I think that he has all the makings of being a plus starter on the next level. I gave him a late 2, and I was a little surprised that he graded that highly for me. And I really do think that a guy like Terrell Bernard is a fantastic football player. Joining a guy like Jalen Petrie on that defense, I think there's a lot more talent on the Baylor defense than maybe some people really understand at this point.
Yeah, Jalen Petrie, kind of that overhang defender. I know some people are really high on him as well. I kind of like what I saw from Bernard as well. I really liked his ability to play through contact despite that size. I thought he played bigger than what his frame was listed at. So I was glad you brought him up. The medical is going to be big. You mentioned the injury at the end of last year. He had a foot injury that cost him all of 2017 as well. So he'll have some things to clear up once we get to the combine next spring. Ben, let's go to you. Who's your pick here for top senior in the Big 12 on defense?
Well, top senior on defense, and surprisingly, I'm going to go with the defensive back from the Texas Tech Red Raiders, and that's DeMarcus Fields. Maybe you even have a quote from our own Zach McPherson now at the Philadelphia Eagles.
Not yet.
We just drafted. This guy's a redshirt super senior, so that's his 6th year. He took the 5th year after a redshirt, 6 foot, 200 pounds. This kid's a 4-year starter, over 2,400 snaps played, 4 picks, 22 PBUs, excellent tackler with over 160 tackles with only a handful of misses. He's got 15 penalties. Why? Because he's physical. He's chippy. He's grabby. He's going to claw you at that catch point. He's going to play to the echo of the whistle, which sometimes goes poorly with the physicality. Sometimes he rakes that ball out late, and it's really impressive. A guy you can rely on special teams with over 500 special team snaps in his career. He plays a lot of off man, a lot of bail stuff, some things that may not translate well at the next level. I just think he's a really experienced player. He's a physical player, and he's a high floor player because of that special teams impact. May switch over to safety, maybe that kind of nickel presence as well because of his willingness to stick his nose into the run and stuff. But just Texas Tech defensive backs, you don't hear about them too often. We got one in Philadelphia. Maybe DeMarcus Fields is the next one heading to the league.
So we're going to go from an older prospect on defense to one of the younger defensive prospects in the country. I'm going to come right back to you, Ben, because I know you really want to talk about Oklahoma's pass rusher, Nick Bonitto, your pick for the most intriguing underclassman on the defensive side of the ball.
Well, this guy is a lightning quick edge rusher out of Oklahoma. He led the team in pressures in 2020. He's got the combination of first step and snap timing, and they're both elite. And he immediately threatens tackles vertically, gets them to turn to the sideline. And then it's just open season with starting to toy with him. Do you go high side? Do you spin back in? Do you slant inside on him? He's good in space, whether he's kind of chasing on the backside, pursuing the boot, maybe on some zone drops. Listen, he needs to get stronger at the point of attack. That's no secret. He's 6'3", maybe 240, 245. He might even be 6'2" and change. He doesn't have that great length. But this is that rush end position where we saw barely 6 foot Eric Stryker and Okoronkwo and some of those undersized guys that just hunt quarterbacks. Is he a Bruce Irvin? Maybe, or maybe he's a Shane Ray type of player coming out of Missouri, more of a snap jumping speed rusher that's a liability against the run. You're drafting this guy to get quarterbacks. I don't think he's quite the Brian Burns type of player, but that's the type of player I think teams want out of Bonitto. Want to see him improve the run defense this year? We know he's going to get quarterbacks.
For what it's worth, and I think most of these undersized rushers will say this every offseason, but for what it's worth, some of the interviews he's given this offseason, he's talked about, number one, getting bigger and stronger, but then number two, working on some different counter moves to be able to win low side. And I think that'll be big for him as well, because a lot of it right now, high side, as an outside rusher, want to see him kind of expand on that.
And just to touch on one more time, we already talked about deep front seven.
Yep.
That could help him. That could hurt him.
Yeah,
he could maybe be down in the sack total next year, but still have same amount of pressures because the other guys beat him to the quarterback. There's going to be some third downs where it's a race to the quarterback, where he may win his pass rush, but may not win the down. So really important to kind of look at the production as well coming this season.
So Bonitto, a really impressive athlete. Maybe not the most impressive athlete we were going to hit on in the front seven in this category, because Ryan, you've got a guy, I studied him as well, Texas linebacker DeMarvion Overshown. He's a really impressive athlete for sure.
Yeah, he's he is the dynamic athlete on the second level. I think of it as like an Alec Ogletree type of arc to his career, because obviously Ogletree was a high-ranked safety recruit coming to Georgia, and he had kind of settled into the linebacker. Eventually, his body just had the ability to add weight. And Overshown came in with Caden Stearns. He came in with B.J. Foster, 3 top-ranked safety recruits, and you were kind of wondering at the time, like, how do these guys all fit? Obviously, before last season, Overshown makes the transition to off-ball linebacker, the full-time, and he has some room to grow, both from a processing perspective and from a physical perspective. He's playing around 215, 217 pounds, And, he had, for his entire life, had been learning to work from depth and to have those safety eyes, right? To have the ability to work from depth and see things that are developing in front of him. Now on the second level, things are happening a lot quicker. Your keys are a lot different. Those nuances of the game is something that he still needs to improve upon. But when we're talking about, again, the unteachables, we keep going back to that. I mean, this kid has length for days. He is incredibly twitchy, athletic. I think that he can have some success both in zone coverage. I think he can man up on guys because I think that he has that twitchiness to him. And he's a heat-seeking missile coming downhill. Like, he has no reservations about getting downhill. Now, sometimes the angles aren't the best. Sometimes he doesn't take on blocks the best. But I think that the skill set here is something that the NFL is really going to value because he is, a dynamic athlete on that second level.
You're hoping for like that Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah type of player. He was used more stacked last year than JOK was, but at 6'4", 217 pounds. I mean, this is a long, lean, angular body type. And you mentioned, I mean, look, honestly, the big thing that stuck out to me, like the eye discipline, the lack of gap discipline in the run game, that showed up. That's just got to improve. But from a physical standpoint, it's like we said earlier, we're willing to buy in to the upside right now in the summer going into that season. That's what I'm hoping to see there from Overshown, Ben.
I really haven't watched Overshown. Is he playing out in space like that nickel Sam, or is he a true Mike Will?
A little bit of both. Go ahead, Ryan. Yep.
Yeah. Oh, no, I was going to say, I mean, you see him at overhang sometimes playing kind of like that big Sam, but for the most part, he's playing Will. He's playing in pursuit. He's not playing on the front side too much. He's really a guy that you're really settling in on his speed and trying to make up distance from the backside.
Because all I have written down is looks like the box safety version of our very impressive prospect up there at Notre Dame, Kyle Hamilton, who's more of a back end player. But now I think we're calling Overshown a linebacker through and through. So the comparisons may be leaving us at this point.
I mean, he's 6'4", 217. It's not bad comparison.
They're similar body types, similar type of athletes. And from what I've heard, some people prefer the presence of an Overshown over Kyle Hamilton.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to go to the secondary here, and I'm going to go with a guy that really stood out to me on film, and that's TCU corner Tre'Vius Hodges-Tomlinso, the nephew of perhaps I would say probably not really an argument there, the best TCU player of all time, LaDainian Tomlinson, silky smooth athlete, 5'9", 177 pounds. So he's undersized, but great athlete, easy change of direction. He's got burst to close. He's got outstanding feet, plays from off coverage, and you'll see him jump routes routinely when he's playing in zone. Really sticky man corner as well. He can plant and drive. He's got the ability to hit pocket at all three levels. 0 career interceptions. That's going to be a little bit of a question mark coming in. Now, Asante Samuel Jr. last year also had 0 career interceptions coming into that season. Was able to get a couple picks last year, ended up being a second-round pick. I think you look at the same thing here with Hodges-Tomlinso because he's got a great knack for getting the football on the ground. So while he hasn't been able to get picks, he's gotten a lot of ball disruptions, and he's just got a knack of playing through the receiver's hands, getting the football on the ground. He's a willing tackler. He's just small. I think the competitiveness shows up. This is a guy that can play inside or outside. Most of the time has been playing outside so far for the Horned Frogs. But I saw Hodges-Tomlinso as a 3-down player in the NFL. And again, that inside-outside versatility, hasn't played a ton in the slot, but he's done a little bit of it. I'm excited to watch how he's used here this fall for TCU. But I don't know if either of you guys have watched Hodges-Tomlinso, but this is a guy I was really, really high on.
Yeah, he's a pesky dude. When we were originally talking about Asante Samuel Jr. last year, I was kind of hesitant at first to say like he could be a guy that could play outside in because you just kind of see the size profile and your mind just kind of pencils those guys in to move inside. But I think that despite the size from Hodges-Tomlinso, like he is a guy that has great route recognition. Now he's going to be a guy that needs to play from off, needs to play a good bit of zone. Like he's not a guy that you're going to want to get up in the face and there's going to be obviously some length limitations to him, both at the catch point and both at the line of scrimmage. But I think he is a pesky dude that can follow. I mean, we talk about like the Devontae Adams of the world, right? Like from a snap-to-snap basis, he might be playing outside, he might be playing inside. Like this is a guy that I think can follow some of those smaller body type wide receivers, and I think that he is that profile that, again, I think he can cross-train at multiple spots and give you a lot of alignment versatility on the back end.
The Jason Verrett comps might be like low-hanging fruit because of TCU, but that's the type of player, and I think he can do what Verrett has done when healthy in the NFL. Let's now go to our next category, biggest sleeper, someone who we think is flying under the radar. We'll go with Hodges-Tomlinson's teammate first, Ben, down in the trenches.
Yeah, I'm quickly panicking, looking up pronunciation guides here at the last minute, so I apologize. But I think it's O'Shawn Mathis.
So, yes.
long, lean edge rusher out of TCU, 6'5", 250. This is a athletic stand-up outside linebacking defensive end off the edge, long limbs hanging down to his knees, ankles. And when he works that long arm, you see full extension, really good separation and strength between him and the tackle. They love to stunt him and work him in with games. He'll even drop off and just spy the quarterback. He's that athletic on third down to just mirror these mobile quarterbacks in the Big 12, springy, explosive out of that stance. He just has a lean lower half. You know, he's a guy that needs to get stronger from the ground up. He's the guy I think resembles a Brian Burns much more than a Nick Benito at Oklahoma. This guy's a little bit more in the 6'5" frame with those long limbs, just needs to get stronger in the butt and those lower legs there. But a really interesting player with some other young guys on that defensive front that he could clean up some sacks and really add to that sack total that I think people want just a little bit higher out there at TCU.
All three of us have edge rushers here for this category, so we'll kind of get through them quick. Ryan, I'll come to you. You want to talk about Iowa State's Will McDonald, another edge rusher here from the Big 12.
Yeah, he's kind of a funky guy to watch a little bit on film because you're looking at the Iowa State defense that's running like 3-3-5 base. So he's playing like, you know, almost a head up position most of the time, head up on the tackle. And he's a guy that is right around 6'4", 230, 235 pounds. So he's not the guy that you would look at as a traditional 3-down defensive end, but he has extreme flexibility in that Big 12 conference. He has, definitely enough juice to win the outside track, even though he's usually aligned not as an outside track rusher. But then what really stuck out to me was I think he has some nuance to his game as far as the ability to work inside counters and jump gap to gap. I think he's a penetration style player that from an outside track and then the ability to work back inside has a lot of flexibility to him. I think there's a bunch of guys this year like Myjai Sanders from Cincinnati is another guy that like they need to add size. They need to add strength. They are not, going to be for everyone, but for those guys that really value those long, athletic, flexible rushers that can, bend impossible angles. I feel like a guy like Will McDonald from Iowa State is going to be a huge riser because I feel like a lot of people talk about that, even though, like Ben said, there's a lot of guys on that defense from Mike Rose and the safety that has, I think is also a super senior as well. So a lot of guys, I really like Will McDonald.
Will McDonald, I think, deserves a whole segment of conversation because this guy is on a meteoric rise. And if he keeps rising, we're talking about a first-round player and maybe a top half of the first-round type of prospect, just to kind of paint the full picture. Player of the year in basketball coming out of high school, state discus champ. And he won the discus wearing Chuck Taylors. He was also third in the high jump, was on the freak list 2 years ago for a 6'9" wingspan. So this is a freak athlete with a lot of length. He came to campus as a linebacker. So he had to convert to defensive end. First team all Big 12 last year with 0 starts. He only played over 300 snaps, 343 snaps. So this is kind of a rotational role player that they just let Hutton quarterbacks on third down and sub packages in that weird 3-3-5 scheme. But this is a springy guy, very explosive. He's going to work in spin moves. If he could just get more playing time, see himself on the field consistently, which I think 2021, he should be on the field every down, every snap type of player. He could keep ascending and really being not just one of the best pass rushers in the Big 12, but in the country.
Perfect pick for this category in terms of a guy that could outperform what we're currently discussing him at. I'm going to go with another pass rusher, another defensive lineman, built a little bit differently than Mathis and a little bit differently than McDonald. And I'm going to go with Isaiah Thomas. Ryan, you mentioned him earlier from Oklahoma, 6'5", 266, only a 1-year starter this past season, but he started the year as an outside player, as a 7-tech defensive end. But then due to injuries and suspensions, he actually slid inside and became more of a 2-eye or a 3 technique. So this is a guy that's got great positional versatility, and that's going to be something he can hang his hat on moving into the NFL. You listen to Alex Grinch, the defensive coordinator. He called him the team MVP. He was second team all conference last year, was really productive, 7.5 sacks, 12 TFLs. I'll tell you what, the other big thing, I thought, and I mentioned all the different stunts and games that they play up front, he was outstanding at running those and helped set up production and disruption for his teammates because he was an absolute hammer as a pinner on some of those TE stunts and some of those ET stunts. So Isaiah Thomas, very, very versatile player. I like his ability to play through contact. He's just not as dynamic. He's not a terrible athlete, but he's just not as dynamic as McDonald or as Mathis or some of these other guys and Nick Benito. But I think when you look at Thomas, he's got a couple different tools in the toolbox for getting after the quarterback. You like the size profile. Guys that are that big, that are less talented than him, go on day 3 every single year. So I think this is a lock draft pick, decent one-on-one ability as a pass rusher, not going to impress you solely off the hoof, but I think this is a good football player. I like Isaiah Thomas. Ryan, you mentioned him earlier. I know you like him as well.
Yeah, no, like you said, he's got that inside outside. I mean, he had as many pressures working inside as he did outside. I think he totaled right around 50 total pressures. So was a very, high contributor for Oklahoma, who has that talented front. And I think that I would agree. He's not a guy that you would call dynamic, because I don't think he's that super flexible outside rusher. I don't think he's going to win the outside track a ton. But what I think he is he's that traditional power converter. And then on third downs, throw him inside. And I mean, some silly moments on film playing inside against guards. He had some guys grasping for air. Like, he is just so quick in tight spaces against some interior offensive linemen. I love the inside-outside possibility of a guy like Isaiah Thomas. I feel like he's a guy that is incalculably important to a team on the next level, just because he gives you so much alignment and versatility.
Now we know how much that means, especially in today's game. A lot of defenses really are looking for guys with that versatility. Let's go next category here. Most approved. Someone with, maybe it's coming off an injury, scheme change, maybe a poor season last year, but someone that's got a lot to prove. And I'll go first here with this one. I'm going to go with Iowa State quarterback Brock Purdy. And this is a big name coming into this past season, 6'1", 212 pounds. So undersized quarterback, not going to wow you with his athleticism. He can make that first man miss. He's a little bit slippery in the pocket, but he's far from a dynamic athlete, and not a great arm talent from a velocity standpoint, right? So the tools aren't outstanding. So with that in mind, I like to see a guy that, manage the game, be a good decision maker. And he dangerously toes that line. And I talked about him last year on this show, and I kind of praised this, but he went too far the other side this past season, where I think the decision-making, he kind of toes that line between gunslinger and reckless. Too often put the ball in harm's way for my liking a year ago, through 9 picks each of the past 2 seasons. So this is a guy that just has to take better care of the football, kind of lean into what your strengths are. And I think when you look at Brock Purdy, this is a guy that can layer throws. He's a good touch passer, play with timing, play with rhythm, play within structure. And I think that this guy, could last in the NFL as a backup for a long time. I just want to see him kind of cut down on some of those mistakes. So that would be me for Brock Purdy. Ben, let's come to you. Who's the guy that you think has the most to prove here in the Big 12?
Well, as much as we've been talking about Oklahoma front seven, we really haven't focused on some of the mainstays, the guys that have been there for a couple of years, and that's LaRon Stokes and Jalen Redmond, for a variety of reasons. Yep. These guys need to stay healthy and stay available. LaRon Stokes was up and down in 2020 with some injuries after being their defensive newcomer of the year in 2019, led the team in sacks. So he was a guy that showed a lot of ability in 2019, high expectations last year, and just never really lived up to it. But looking to get back to that 2019 form this year. And Jalen Redmond, he opted out of 2020, missed almost an entire another season with the blood clots, I believe. So almost 2 full seasons missing. He's a very, very talented interior run defender and pass rusher. So in combination with Benito and Isaiah Thomas and Winfrey and an exciting deep linebacking core, their front seven is deep, deep, deep. So I just want to see these 2 guys not lose their spots to some of the young guys. So most approved, stay healthy, stay available, and go get some production, because these guys are extremely talented. And I'm just happy to see them all stay. There may not be snaps to go around, but doesn't mean you have to transfer out of the program if you're not getting that, first or second team playing time. Stay focused, stay committed, and just stay healthy. And I think these guys are really ready and really hungry heading into the season. With
Redmond and Stokes being, more of a mainstay here this year, my guess is they'll try and keep Isaiah Thomas out to the outside. When Stokes was down with injury, that's when they shifted Thomas into more of a permanent inside role this past season. So Stokes is interesting. I talked about him on the show for the Big 12 preview a year ago after he was that newcomer of the year. Kind of reminds me a little bit, Ben, of former Eagle Seth Thornton. Like, I feel like he's kind of got that body type. He's kind of deceptive athlete. He can get after the quarterback. Just the production has just been non-existent. But this is a guy who has not played a ton of football. He's a JUCO transfer who was homeschooled in high school. He's not played a ton of football. Ryan, you got a player going now kind of into the secondary. I would have taken this guy if you did not for most to prove here in the secondary. Noah Daniels, the corner from TCU.
Yeah, as soon as I saw that injury was a part of the conversation, Noah Daniels is a guy that 2019 missed the full season. 2020, he plays in 4 football games, misses the bulk of the season again. From a physical perspective, we're talking about a guy going back to high school, was a 10,300-meter guy at 6 foot plus. He has some outstanding long speed coupled with the length that he has. And you see, I mean, it's hard for guys to get on top of him just because he is just such an easy, loose athlete. He just hasn't played a ton of football. But, I think that from a physical perspective, he's got everything that you look for. And I think Jim Nagy, a director of the Senior Bowl, even highlighted him at one point. It's just, if he puts it all together and has a full season injury-free, he could be a big riser. I wouldn't doubt it if he goes before Hodges-Tomlinso when it's all said and done, because he fits more of the profile that the NFL tends to value as an outside corner. So Noah Daniels is one that I'm excited about because the athleticism, the size is all there. He just hasn't been able to stay healthy. This is a huge make it or break it season for the redshirt junior.
All right, so let's get to the next category here. Newcomer on the scene, either a transfer or a replacement player stepping in for a guy that has graduated or moved on to the NFL. Ryan, you talked about Wanya Morris, the offensive tackle for Oklahoma, who came over from Tennessee. So I'll come to you first for his former teammate and current teammate now, the running back, Eric Gray.
Yeah. I mean, like Ben said, we have Tennessee guys all over college football. We got two that just decided to go over to Norman, Oklahoma. So Eric Gray, for me, was a 4-star recruit, had some nice moments as a true freshman. I thought he had some really nice tape in 2020 as the lead ball carrier, kind of, sharing the load a little bit with a Ty Chandler, who now is over at North Carolina. But I really do like Eric Gray for the size profile he has. I know he's up to about 207 pounds at about 5'9", so he's pretty densely built. I think he has very good short area explosiveness. I think he is a great player to manipulate space on the second level. He makes some second level defenders look very stupid in space. So I think that he has those attributes as a pure zone runner. And I think he's got a little contact balance to him. I think he catches the ball solidly. For me, he is a guy that just kind of checks almost every box. He does everything relatively well. I wouldn't say necessarily there is one outstanding trait where I would say, again, like, outstanding power back that has big time speed or anything. But I think that Eric Gray has just kind of that all around skill set that I think combined with a Kennedy Brooks, I mean, I don't know if there's a better 1-2 punch in all of college football in this season.
Let's go. And I think Eric Gray, one of the more exciting players potentially in the Big 12 here this year. Ben, I know you want to stay with another skill player here in the Big 12 down at TCU.
Yeah, I think Eric Gray and Ty Chandler are each really going to flourish in their new homes. Eric Gray at Oklahoma, Ty Chandler picking up all the scraps from Javonte Williams and Michael Carter at North Carolina. But I'm going to go with the Steve Sarkisian bus, which he grabbed a couple Alabama players on his way to Texas, guys. Interesting linebacker, Ben Davis, who's been at Alabama for 5 years, but only played about 80 snaps. So we'll see what he has left in the tank after being a high recruit. But the interesting one is this little running back, Keelan Robinson. Didn't play last year, so he's technically a redshirt sophomore. He's about 5'9", 180. He's a small back, but he is explosive. He's exciting and could be a really nice change of pace back with their already young sophomore, Bijan Robinson, and a couple other young recruits coming in there. So I just trust him. Maybe he has a leg up on the offense, come over with Sarkisian. Maybe it's one of his darlings out on that scout team that, he's just been dying to find a way to get onto the field. Kickoff returner too. So a couple guys heading from Alabama over to the Texas Longhorns.
I'm going to go with another transfer. And actually, my player actually fits for multiple reasons because this is a transfer player who's stepping in for some two players that have moved on to the NFL. So this is TCU safety TJ Carter, the former Memphis corner. Now, Carter's listed 5'11", 190. He's going to step in for Trevon Merrick and Ardarius Washington down there with the Horned Frogs. Former Memphis corner, like I said, he already has 45 career starts under his belt. He's already played over 3,000 snaps in the secondary for Memphis. So this guy's got a ton of experience. He got to Memphis in 2017, freshman All-American, AAC Rookie of the Year, and then he was a two-time second-team All-Conference player in 17 and 18. But then as his junior and senior years came, the production and the playing time kind of wore off a little bit. I know he was a little bit banged up, but this is a guy that played corner for the Tigers, making the transition to safety. I could see why they're making that transition to safety. So I'm excited to see him with the position switch, but that position flexibility will certainly help him. I'm excited to see him in the new scheme, but a guy that is very accomplished at the college level, now making the move over to the Horned Frogs at a different position. So that'll be fun to watch. Guys, let's wrap this up. future studs, a player that's not draft eligible for 2022, but we need to watch for the future. And I'm going to start off with a guy that I actually couldn't help myself. I actually did a little bit of a deep dive on Oklahoma wide receiver Marvin Mims. This guy is so fun to watch. 5'11", only 177 pounds as a true freshman last year. But this kid is good, a good athlete, stop, start, quickness, the fluidity, the speed to get on top. He tracks the ball extremely well, a proven deep threat, can make plays through contact late in the down, great acrobatic catches downfield, made all kinds of tough catches outside the strike zone as well. Very sure-handed. The ball very rarely hit the ground. Marvin Mims, he's got the makings of a really good NFL starter, so I'm excited for him, but we're not talking about him until the 2023 NFL draft, but just a name to keep an eye on, Ben.
Yeah, absolutely. He's a fun player, and I believe, considering how prolific Oklahoma receivers have been, the first to be a freshman All-American.
Yeah.
So I don't think CeeDee Lamb did that, or Hollywood Brown, or whoever was before them, but really fun running back out at Kansas State. Yep. Prototypical size at 5'5", 155 pounds, and that's Deuce Vaughn, who's a little Darren Sproles type of clone. You just have to with that size, position, Kansas State. Excuse me, but this guy is electric. You just find any ways to get him the ball, both as a runner and as a receiver. He is a lot of fun to watch out there. He is tough to tackle. He's explosive, short area quickness. He's creative. I think he's one of the few guys in college football to have 300 last year, or 400, whatever that threshold is, Fran, that I always like to find.
Love those thresholds, yep.
Deuce Vaughn, really, really fun player at Kansas State, 5'5", 160. If you ever see that on, late Saturday morning, Kansas State, just look for that little running back in the backfield.
I like it. Ryan, who do you got for us?
Yeah, I went with another running back. I mean, you mentioned Deuce Vaughn. You're talking about guys like Tank Bigsby for 2023 already. I went with Bijan Robinson, who we also mentioned a little earlier in the podcast, running back for Texas. I went into 2020. I was holding out so much hope for Keontae Ingram. I really liked Keontae Ingram on film from a, just a contact balance perspective, physical runner, had some juice to him. But of course, he fell out of favor with the injuries, got get bagged up a bunch, had some fumbling issues. And, he was kind of the 1-2 punch with Rashawn Johnson, former quarterback recruit, who, is now a 6'2", 225, 230-pound running back. But down the stretch, it is this four-star, five-star freshman running back, Bijan Robinson, who, again, is a nicely built running back who is super explosive. Down the stretch, he was arguably the last 4 or 5 games of the season, the best running back in all of college football. So headlining, again, a group with Tank Bigsby potentially in a couple of years is a fantastic running back out of Texas.
Yeah, there's a couple guys from this Big 12 conference that we didn't even mention that we could have gone with for this category, but a ton of talent in this conference. Guys, this has been great. Thanks so much for joining us here once again on the Journey to the Draft podcast. Ben, we'll talk to you next week. Ryan, we'll have you on again here as we get into football season. All right, hope you guys enjoyed that Big 12 preview. Outstanding stuff there from Ben Fennell. And thanks again to Ryan Roberts for joining us on the show. Like I said, we're going to be joined here in Mr. Relevant by my buddy Pete Sampson. Does a great job covering the Notre Dame Fighting Irish back to independent status. Does a great job covering them on a year-round basis for The Athletic. Let's get to that chat now in Mr. Relevant.
It's time for Mr. Relevant.
Well, excited to be joined once again by The Athletic's Pete Sampson, who does a great job covering the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. He joins us pretty much on a yearly basis here on the show. Pete, welcome back, man.
Yeah, it's good to be with you again.
So let's talk through the Irish. Obviously, a great season last year in the ACC, and I guess we'll lead that off. A year ago when we spoke, things were kind of up in the air. They hadn't quite talked, or they hadn't quite cemented the fact that they were going to join the ACC, on that temporary basis in 2020. We talked about the different options at the feet of the Irish. They go to the ACC. They have a lot of success. They end up in the playoff. So now I want to ask you, now that we're a year removed from that decision and they are back to independent status, what's kind of the discourse around that season? And is it something that we could see on a more permanent basis moving forward? Or you feel like, no, they're going to definitely stay independent?
I think they will definitely stay independent as long as they possibly can. And, it's with the college football playoff moving towards 12 teams, to me, that sort of strengthens their independent hand because they're going to still have access to that postseason, more access than they did before. So, I think Notre Dame sort of looks at last year as it was great. They appreciate the ACC. They have a very good working partnership with them. But to have a schedule that was supposed to start in Ireland, include Wisconsin at Lambeau Field, end in the LA Coliseum against USC. I think that's more what how Notre Dame sees itself from a football perspective, and limiting yourself within one conference, I think is that sort of runs counter to that. So I don't, as much as I think it was a good experience, I don't think it moves the needle in terms of wanting to actually join a conference.
Honestly, they were one of the first schools I thought of as the talk about the college football playoff expanding. I was like, yeah, Notre Dame is going to stay put. They're definitely not making that move on a permanent basis. So let's get into some of these players, because last week on the show, we broke down all the top players that weren't playing in a Power 5 conference. That includes the independent schools and obviously Notre Dame. So one of the players that we talked about at length, and we said this might be the best prospect not playing in a Power 5 school, was junior safety Kyle Hamilton. And so I want to ask you, we talked about him on the field a week ago. Interested to kind of get your take in terms of how you feel he is viewed internally by his teammates, by the coaches, your interactions with what is he like away from the field, and what has been the buzz about him in that sense?
Very smart guy. I don't think he's sort of a rah-rah leader type. I wouldn't say like his default setting is to stand up in front of the team and give a speech or drag guys along that way. I think he has that in him, and I think that will probably show this fall. But very smart guy, very calculated guy. Does not give a whole lot away in interviews, but he knows how good he is. I would compare him a little bit to Jalen Smith, and just in terms of great player. I wouldn't say that he is like an all-time great leader. That's again, Jalen Smith was a captain. Kyle Hamilton will be a captain. But I think as a player, he is as unique to the safety position as Jalen was to the linebacker position, if not more, right. Because you just don't find safeties built like him. I think it'll be very interesting to sort of see him mature a little bit, and maybe we'll see a different side of his personality come out. I really feel like the last 2 years, he watched, he listened, he learned. But I also think he's more kind of reserved in terms of what he puts off to the public. Maybe that will change a little bit this year as he goes into his junior year, and certainly would be a top 10 pick candidate a year from now.
Has there been any talk about like the change in usage potentially with a new defensive system, new defensive scheme with Clark Lee moving on to Vanderbilt?
Yes, there has been talk about it. What that looks like, Marcus Freeman has not told me. Right. But I know that privately Marcus Freeman has told people like they are going to wear Kyle Hamilton out. He's not just going to be a single high center fielder safety, which he can do. But he's not just going to be in the box as a blitzer, almost, similar to how they used Jeremiah Usu-Koromoa perhaps in certain spots last year. I think, he could be a nickel corner. He could be a safety. They could put him in actual corner. They could put him an outside linebacker. I mean, I do think that, last year, I think there was a lot of Usu-Koromoa compared to Isaiah Simmons conversation. Right. I think Hamilton is probably the better Simmons conversation because like he really can do everything and is such a freak in terms of the measurables. I'm going to be fascinated to see how Marcus Freeman employs him.
So we've got the continuity or the lack of continuity from a schematic standpoint. Obviously, Marcus Freeman coming over from Cincinnati, joining the Irish. Offensively, more continuity from a schematic standpoint, but personnel a little bit different. I would say the big playmaker, I guess, from my point of view, Kyren Williams at running back returning, and we talked about him last week on the show as well. I want to ask you the same kind of question for Kyren. What is the bill on him off the field?
I mean, off the field, his default setting is more get up in front of the team, demand like excellence from your teammates. That's different. He is more out there. I think his attitude, talking to Tommy Reese, their offensive coordinator, like when they go out and recruit, one of the things they're looking for is Kyren Williams' attitude in receivers and running backs and tight ends. They sort of see that attitude as a real sort of force multiplier for what they are offensively. So that he is very popular with the staff. And I think he's very popular with his teammates as well. More out is probably the biggest personality outward facing on the team right now. Certainly not the talent that Kyle Hamilton is in terms of uniqueness, but in terms of holding an offense together that, you're replacing 4 stars on the offensive line, new quarterback, new receivers. You lost Tommy Tremble, tight end. They're going to need somebody to sort of hold it all together from a player perspective. And I think Kyren Williams sort of has the attitude to do it.
It's funny. I'm a big believer, and this isn't the case for every player, but their personality typically comes through with how they play the game. And I feel everything you just said about Kyren, that shows up. Pass protection with how hard he runs. I mean, you could see that he's not necessarily a coach's pet, but like that kind of player. He does everything the right way.
Yeah, I mean, there was a play at Pittsburgh last year, and it was maybe like a 3-yard touchdown run. But I mean, you can see there a linebacker comes over to sort of like half tackle him, and Williams is just like, like I'm putting my helmet into your chest. Look, completely unnecessary because he could have just fallen into the end zone. But like that's sort of the attitude that he plays with, and I think that people pick that up. You mentioned the blitz pickup. His game against Clemson in November, the first one was really a masterpiece of blitz pickup. Any NFL team is gonna be like, damn, this is. We usually have to coach this for 2 or 3 years before a guy gets it. He's coming out of the box ready for this kind of thing.
Yeah, especially against that scheme with Brent Venables. Yep. I mean, for what he did in that game, really remarkable. All right, so you mentioned the attrition on this Notre Dame roster. You lose Ian Book, the winningest quarterback in school history. Most of that offensive line, Tremble, Skowronek, JOK on defense, the 2 starting defensive ends for the second straight year move on. So I want to ask you, just for the 2021 season, is there a guy or two that you feel like, all right, like they're ready to kind of make that ascension into the next step where they're more of the national discourse and everybody will know their name by the end of the year?
I mean, there are 3 guys. They're all on offense. That at least jump out to me. Mike Mayer at tight end is probably he's probably first round pick good. Second round at worst as a 3-year player. He's going into a sophomore year. I mean, I've covered Notre Dame for 20 years, which means I've covered a lot of really good tight ends. Yeah. He is as I don't know if he's good as Tyler Eifert or Kyle Rudolph in terms of athletic ability, but he is 3rd at worst from that group. So very unique individual in terms of how athletic and agile he is at his size. It's very hard to hurdle people at 260 pounds, 250 pounds, but he can do it. But then like the 2 other guys, 2 offensive skill position players. Kevin Austin is a senior receiver. He's been suspended. He's been injured. He has 6 catches in his career. But if Notre Dame's offense really clicks, he's going to have like a Miles Boykin, Chase Claypool kind of season. And they believe he has that ability. He just has not been able to show it. Still a question whether he will. But that's a real difference maker for Notre Dame's offense in terms of the ceiling. And then the other running back, Chris Tyree, going into a sophomore year, the staff feels like he can make a similar jump to Kyren Williams from Williams freshman to sophomore year. The difference is Williams carried, I think, 4 times as a freshman and then took a red shirt. Tyree carried about 50, ran for about 500 yards, but they think he's going to essentially be comparable to Kyren Williams last year. So they will have 2, I think, next level quality backs, and Tyree is much more of a home run hitter than Kyren Williams is. Kyren Williams hit some home runs. So those are 3 guys offensively. One's a senior who hasn't played. The other 2 are sophomores who were big time recruits. But if they'll click on Mayer, but if Austin and Tyree click too, then the offense could be pretty dynamic.
And I'm glad you brought up Kevin Austin because he was a guy that a year and a half ago, pre-pandemic, before the world shut down, when I was able to talk to players in person at the Combine, Senior Bowl, Shrine Bowl, every Notre Dame guy I talked to was like, yeah, Kevin Austin is going to be that guy. And obviously it did not work out for him this past fall, but excited to hear you say that this could be the breakout year for him this fall.
Yeah, there's no question. I just think there was one spring practice, the only spring practice Notre Dame had last year when he was healthy. And he toyed with the secondary. I mean, just toyed with them. And then everything shut down. He broke his foot and didn't really hear from him again. But like, if he can be half of that player for 12 games, Notre Dame has a very, very high level receiver on its hands.
So over the years, I've asked you this question every single time you've come on, and you spotlighted Jerry Tillery when he was not eligible for the draft as a guy. Could watch him for the future. Phil Jerkovich was a guy that you brought up now, obviously at Boston College. You
in a roundabout way, I guess I was right on that one.
You nailed that one for sure. So I'm going to ask you the same question. You brought up Michael Mayer, a guy that certainly has that first round ability who's not eligible for 2022. Is there another guy or two on this roster that you're like, yeah, look, not for next year's draft, for down the line, just keep an eye out for this guy?
I'll give you a couple guys on defense because like Mayer's cheating for this question. I think in some ways Austin and Tyree is as well. But there are a couple defensive. Well, I'll give you 3 defensive linemen. I'm not sure which one is going to click, but Isaiah Foskey and Jordan Botelho are a couple defensive ends. Have not played a lot. Botelho is a sophomore, has barely played at all. I think he is going to have a boomer bust college career, like typical screw loose kid. You bake in 2 personal fouls for roughing the passer before the season and just hope you get 2 or under. But is wired in a way he has a chance to be great. He has a chance to sort of play himself onto the bench, but could be dynamic. But I think if I was going to give you a real deep cut for like 23 or maybe even 24, there's a defensive tackle named Riley Mills. He's 6'5", pushing, I would say like 280, 290, but like cut. Really athletic, light on his feet. He will be a rotational player this year. They're very old at defensive tackle. So there's not a ton of opportunity for him to get like 60 snaps a game. But I think his junior year in 2022 and then his senior year in 2023, I think he could be like All-American type good.
Wow.
He's just, you don't see defensive linemen put together like that very often anywhere, not just at Notre Dame. And I think he's got some real natural flexibility and bend to his game that he will be a bona fide pro prospect who has barely played at all this year after his freshman year. But I think that he is going to be a dynamic player as a junior and a senior.
Interesting. Sorry, he was not a name that was on my radar. You mentioned Foskey. I know he was a guy I nearly talked about last week. The Duke game last year. I remember watching that on TV and him just like jumping off the screen.
Looks like $1 million. I think that in terms of like, does he have the play speed against higher level competition? We'll see. I mean, this is a time for him to show it, but like he was not a factor against Alabama or Clemson or North Carolina. He destroyed teams that either didn't block them schematically or were just overwhelmed athletically. This is the year that he needs to prove that he can be a guy against really good teams. But you look at him in a uniform, and like, how could this guy not be a day 2 pick at worst? He's just somebody that's going to have to show it.
Pete Sampson, you can follow him on Twitter at Pete Sampson _ He does great work for The Athletic, their college football section, covering Notre Dame. Pete, thanks so much for joining us here on the Journey to the Draft podcast.
Anytime. I always enjoy it.
Hope you guys enjoyed this week's episode. Great stuff there from Pete Sampson. Great stuff earlier as well from Ryan Roberts and from Ben Fennell. We'll be back next week. We're going to the West Coast. We're going to break down the top players in the Pac-12. A lot of great players, a lot of great talent. It's been a little bit of a down couple years out West. A lot of great players this year for the 2022 NFL Draft. We'll talk about it next week right here on the Journey to the Draft podcast presented by Life Brand.
Hi, Eagles fans. I'm Connor Barwin, and I'm here to tell you about the Eagles Autism Challenge presented by Lincoln Financial Group. This year's event will take place on Saturday, August 21st, and we can't wait to see all of you back at Lincoln Financial Field live and in person. Register today to walk, run, or ride. In addition to making a transformational impact on the autism community, you'll also receive a complimentary ticket to our public practice on Sunday, August 22nd. Register today at eaglesautismchallenge.org, and I'll see you there.